The silence of the galaxy was not empty. It was filled with whispers, with the hum of ancient stars and the faint, fading echoes of long-dead civilizations. In a quiet sector on the galactic rim, a new sound was born. It was not a shout, not a declaration, but a sob. A deep, resonant wave of pure emotion pulsed from the lush, green world of Vernal. The Ilthan were a people of peace. They grew in harmony with their world, their bodies gentle and plant-like, their thoughts slow and communal. They did not have a word for war. They had words for unseasonal frost and invasive blight. When the great, jagged ships of the cracks descended from the black sky, they first thought it was a strange, metallic weather. Then the harvesting began. Vines of energy siphoned the vibrant colors from their forests, turning them to ash. Drones, clicking and mindless, swept through their crystalline cities, gathering the Ilthan not to kill, but to process. The horror was not in violence, but in consumption. They were being turned into fuel. Their final act was not a fight. It was a song, a dirge. They linked their communal consciousness and cast it into the void. It was a hyperpulse signal, carrying not data or coordinates, but raw feeling. It carried the cool terror of the shadow falling on their sun. It carried the sorrow of the last blue-leafed tree withering. It carried the dying hope that someone, somewhere, might hear a song of ending and care enough to listen. The signal raced across the light years, weakening, distorting. By the time it reached the sensors of the United Earth Orbital Array, it was a ghost. A faint, anomalous ripple in the background static. It was the graveyard shift, the quiet hours when Earth's night side was vast and dark below the station. Li Min was drinking cold, bitter coffee. His eyes were tired from staring at scrolling data streams that never changed. He was a technician, a watcher of screens. His job was to log anomalies and let the day shift analysts worry about them. When his console chimed with a low priority flag, he almost ignored it. But the pattern was strange. It wasn't random noise. It had a rhythm, a terrible, weeping rhythm. Curiosity flickered, cutting through his boredom. He ran it through the basic translation algorithms. The Galactic Common Protocol filters failed. The linguistic matrices produced gibberish. Frustrated, he routed it to the newer experimental emotional resonance decoder. It was a tool for understanding alien art or music, not for first contact. The console screen filled not with words, but with cascading colors. Deep, bruise-like purples of despair. Sharp, acid yellows of fear. The dull, fading gray of acceptance. A sound played through the speakers, a low, harmonic hum that made the hair on Min's arms stand up. It was the sound of a forest dying. It was the sound of a child's final breath. It was unmistakably a cry for help, but one without any expectation of answer. Li Min sat frozen, the cold coffee forgotten in his hand. This was not a diplomatic hail. This was a death rattle. Protocol was clear. Flag it, archive it, notify the senior comms officer in 6 hours. He looked at the data stamp. The signal's origin was the rim, a lawless area. Getting involved was dangerous. Earth was new to the galactic stage, timid, focused on trade and technology exchange. They had no army, only a small peacekeeping force for orbital security. His finger hovered over the archive button. He looked at the real-time feed of Earth on his secondary monitor. A blue-green marble swirled with white clouds, peaceful and whole. He thought of the gray ash in the signal's emotional core. He did not archive it. He flagged it as a priority Omega, a potential existential event, and sent it directly to the desk of the chair of the United Earth Council, bypassing 20 levels of bureaucracy. Then he sat back, his heart pounding, wondering if he had just ended his career. The council chamber was in an uproar. The signal, now rendered into visceral visual and auditory data, played on the main display. Some representatives looked away, sickened. The ambassador from the Jessin hegemony, a wrinkled, cautious being, was the first to speak. This is a tragedy, but it is a rim tragedy. The cracks are a known ecological hazard. Engaging them is not peacekeeping. It is suicide. Our mandate is the safety of Earth, not galactic heroics. The debate raged for hours. The risk was colossal. The cracks were a swarm. They did not negotiate. Sending a ship could be seen as an act of aggression, drawing their attention to Earth. Resources were thin. The arguments for inaction were logical, sensible, safe. Then, Chairperson Alina Vance, a woman with tired eyes and a spine of steel, spoke. She did not talk of strategy or resources. She replayed a segment of the signal, isolating a single, thin thread within the dirge. It was a color. A faint, stubborn streak of gold, like the last ray of sunset before a long night. The translation software labeled it, "Hope for others." "They are not asking us to save them," Vance said, her voice quiet but filling the chamber. "They have accepted their end." That color, that is a hope that their story, their death, might matter to someone else, that they might not vanish unnoticed from the universe. If we hear this and do nothing, what does that make us? Not safe, just silent. The vote was the closest in Council history. The mandate was authorized. A single vessel, the Odyssey, a long-range environmental survey ship with reinforced hull plating. Its mission was reconnaissance and humanitarian assessment only. Avoid engagement. Observe. Report. If possible, offer technical or medical aid to survivors. The unspoken order was, do not start a war. The crew was assembled not from soldiers, but from specialists. Commander Park Ji-hun was a veteran of deep space ice mining operations, known for his calm under pressure and his ability to fix anything with spare parts and stubbornness. Biologist Kim Soo had spent 5 years cataloging extreme xenofauna on Titan. She understood how life clung to existence. Engineer Choi Hana had designed the Odyssey's own drive systems. She knew every circuit and conduit in the ship like her own nervous system. They were given their briefing in a sterile, white room. They saw the cracks harvest footage. They heard the dirge. Ji-hun's face was a placid mask, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the table. Sue took meticulous notes on cracks drone morphology, her scientific curiosity, and war with her revulsion. Hana simply asked, "What are the yield specs on their energy beams? Can our shields take a glancing hit?" They were not heroes. They were technicians, scientists, and a former miner. They were given a ship, a vague mission, and a recording of a requiem. As the Odyssey detached from its docking ring and pointed its nose toward the distant, dark rim of the galaxy, Li Min watched its departure from his console. He saw the tiny pinprick of light vanish into the starfield, heading towards the source of the gray despair and the fading golden hope. He whispered a single word into the quiet of the monitoring station, a word that felt too small and too human for what was happening. Good luck. The Odyssey slid out of warp space with a soft shudder. The starfield here was sparse, lonely. But ahead, filling the main viewport, hung Vernal. It was a world of stunning beauty, even from a distance. Swirls of deep blue ocean met continents painted in vibrant greens, ambers, and violets. It looked like a living jewel. The feeling of awe lasted only a second. Park Ji-hun, standing on the command platform, felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Around the planet, like flies on fruit, were the cracked ships. They were not sleek or designed. They were jagged, asymmetrical collections of dark metal and pulsating green energy nodes. Tendrils, like the roots of some malignant space fungus, extended down into the atmosphere, sipping the color from the world below. Great patches of the vibrant continents were already sickly gray and brown. God, whispered Kim Soo from the science station. Her screen showed magnified imagery. The gray wasn't just dead land. It was powder, ash. The cracks were literally reducing the biosphere to dust and hoovering it up. Total cellular disaggregation. They're not farming. They're digesting the planet. Choi Hanna's hands flew over the engineering console. Energy signatures are off the scale. Those tendrils are pulling terawatts of bioenergy. Their ships are basically mobile stomachs. Ji-hun took a slow breath. The mission parameters echoed in his head. Observe. Report. Avoid engagement. Hanna, can we mask our signature? Stay on the edge of the system? Trying, Hanna said, her voice tight. But their sensor sweep is organic. It's not like scanning for engine heat. It's like they're tasting the space around them. It was too late. A ripple seemed to pass through the nearest Crack's harvester. It detached its feeding tendril from the planet with a sickening slurp of energy and turned, a collection of sharp angles and baleful green lights, towards the Odyssey. A communication request blinked on the console, not a standard hail, but a raw data burst. Put it through, Ji-hun ordered. The screen filled not with an image, but with a chaotic, hungry pattern. It was a visual scream of consumption. Shapes that suggested mouths and digestive tracts pulsed. A translation, provided by the ship's beleaguered computer, scrolled below. Organic matter detected. Approach for assimilation. Do not flee. Flesh is waste. Nutrients are eternal. This is Commander Park Ji-hun of the United Earth Vessel Odyssey. We are on a peaceful mission. We respond to a distress signal from the native species. Cease your actions and withdraw. The response was immediate. The pattern on the screen convulsed in what might have been alien laughter. Distress is irrelevant. You are carbon. You are potential. You will be added to the whole. Helm, get us out of here. Best speed to the jump point, Ji-hun said. His calm voice belying the urgency. The Odyssey pivoted, its engines flaring. But the Crack ship moved with terrifying, unnatural speed. It didn't fly. It seemed to lurch through space. A pod launched from its side, unfolding into a web of crackling green energy. It wasn't a missile. It was a net. Incoming energy web. It's going to foul the engines. Hanna shouted. Evasive pattern. Ji-hun called. Was no use. The web expanded, impossibly large, and wrapped around the Odyssey's stern. Green lightning crawled over the hull. Screens flashed red. A deafening screech of tearing metal and frying circuits filled the bridge. The main engines died with a final, pathetic whine. The ship was caught. Primary propulsion offline. Secondary thrusters at 20%. Shields failing, Hanna reported, her voice a clinical monotone born of shock. They're reeling us in. Through the viewport, they could see the Crack's harvester growing larger. A maw-like opening lined with grinding, crystalline teeth began to iris open on its side. The Odyssey was being pulled towards a literal mouth. Options, Ji-hun said, looking at Hanna. The engineer's face was pale but set. The emergency core purge. If I overload the auxiliary power cells and trigger a controlled breach on the port side, the blast might shred that energy net. But it'll send us spinning down towards the planet. Atmospheric entry will be rough. Do it, Ji-hun said. There was no other choice. Better a crash landing than being digested. Hanna's fingers danced. Alarms wailed a new, more urgent song. Brace for impact and rotation. In 3, 2, 1. A thunderous detonation rocked the ship. The viewport whirled sickeningly, showing stars, then the green and gray planet, then the angry Crack ship. The screech of the energy net vanished, replaced by the howl of atmosphere as the Odyssey, tumbling and crippled, fell into Vernal's gravity. Well, the next minutes were a nightmare of noise and pressure. Kim Soo was thrown from her station, saved by her harness. Ji-hun clung to his chair, shouting commands that were lost in the roar. Hana, strapped in at engineering, watched her console disintegrate in a shower of sparks as systems failed one by one. They crashed not with a fiery explosion, but with a colossal, groaning tear. The ship plowed through a forest of towering, violet fronds, shearing them off like grass, before slamming into a soft, boggy lakebed. The impact drove the air from their lungs. Then, silence, broken only by the hiss of steam from the ship's hot metal, and the dripping of fluid dot smoke filled the bridge. Emergency lights cast a dim, red glow. Ji-hun unbuckled, his body screaming in protest. "Report! Is everyone alive?" A cough from science. "Alive," Sue managed. "Engineering. Functional. Sort of," Hana's voice came over the crackling intercom. "Hull is breached in sections 3 and 4. Life support is on batteries. We are not spaceworthy." Ji-hun moved to a cracked viewport. They were in a swamp. The air was thick, humid, and carried a sweet, rotting smell. The violet fronds around them were beautiful, but in the distance he could see the gray. The creeping, lifeless gray of the Cracks harvest. It was maybe 10 kilometers away, and moving. "We need to move," he said. "They'll have seen us go down. They'll come to collect the nutrients." They gathered what they could: a med kit, portable scanners, hydration packs. And the only weapons they had 2 standard-issue sidearms, meant for deterring aggressive fauna, with a few dozen charges each. They were tools of last resort, not weapons of war. As they slid down the emergency ramp into the squelching mud, they saw their first Ilthan. They were huddled in the hollow of a great, gnarled root, 3 of them. They were tall, slender, with bark-like skin and clusters of glowing moss where a face might be. They trembled, making soft, chiming sounds of terror. Kim Sue approached slowly, hands open. "We heard your song," she said softly, though she knew they couldn't understand. "We're here to help." Before any connection could be made, a new sound cut through the swamp's humidity. A sharp, insect-like buzzing. 3 Cracks drones, each the size of a large dog, descended through the canopy. They were all hard angles and clicking mandibles, with a single green photoreceptor. They hovered, scanning. One zeroed in on the Ilthan. A thin beam of light lanced out, encapsulating one of the trembling beings. The Ilthan went rigid, let out a chime of pure agony, and began to dissolve into a stream of shimmering particles that were sucked into the drone. "No!" Sue screamed, her scientific detachment shattering. Ji-hun acted without thinking. He raised his sidearm and fired. The blue energy bolt struck the drone's carapace. It didn't explode. It sparked, let out an angry buzz, and turned its photoreceptor towards him. The message was clear. Annoyance. An inconvenience. Run. Ji-hun yelled. They ran, splashing through the bog, the 2 remaining Ilthan stumbling after them. The drones buzzed in pursuit, firing dissolver beams that turned patches of vibrant moss and water into inert dust. This wasn't a battle. It was a pest control operation, and they were the pests. They were not soldiers. They were a miner, a biologist, and an engineer. But they were humans, and a deep, old part of their brain, a part older than civilization, understood one thing: prey that cannot fight must run, hide, and become clever. The hunt was on. The cave was not deep, but it was hidden behind a waterfall of sluggish, silver liquid that smelled of metal and wet stone. It was there that the last of them collapsed. The 2 surviving Ilthan, who chimed the names Li Ren and Kale, pressed themselves against the cold rock, their moss lights pulsing with a fearful, slow rhythm. The 3 humans sat gasping, clothes soaked with bog water and streaked with gray ash. Park, Ji-hun checked the charge on his sidearm. 23 shots left. Kim Soo was using a portable scanner, its beam flickering over the cave entrance. Choi Hana had her multi-tool out, already prying open a panel on her damaged wrist Kong. "We can't outrun them," Ji-hun stated, his voice flat. "They're too fast. And shooting them just makes them angry. So what?" Hannah snapped, frustration cracking her usual calm. "We wait here until they sniff us out and turn us into soup?" Sue looked up from her scanner. "No, we observe. We learn. That's what we do." She pointed the scanner at the cave wall, but her mind was elsewhere. They're not predators. Not in a natural sense. They don't hunt. They harvest. They're a swarm. A consuming swarm. They have no fear, because they've never encountered anything that could hurt the swarm. Only things that are not yet consumed. Li Ren, the taller of the two Ilfin, made a series of soft, chiming notes. The translation device on Sue's belt, still struggling, produced broken words. Why? You fight? Pain is absolute. You cause. You feel why? Ji-hun looked at the being, at its gentle, plant-like form that shied away from a raised voice. How do you explain fight or flight to a creature that only knew how to wilt? "So does dying," he said, his voice quiet but hard. "Dying hurts too. We choose the pain that might lead to living." The concept seemed to baffle the Ilfin. Kale chimed, the translator offering. "You are. Loud pain. They are. Silent consumption. Both are end." "Not if we break the cycle," Hannah muttered, tapping her broken wrist comp. She looked at Ji-hun. "The Odyssey's main comms array is fried. But the secondary emitter, the one for planetary survey pulses, it might be salvageable. If I can get it working, I could modify it. Broadcast a wide-frequency signal." "To who?" Sue asked. "The Council won't send a fleet. And a distress call will just bring more cracks." "Not a distress call," Hana said, a strange light in her eyes. She looked at Sue. "You said they're a swarm. Like insects, right? What disrupts a swarm? What makes a hive go crazy?" Sue thought. "A threat to the queen. A major predator. A fundamental mismatch in signals." Ji-hun understood first. He looked from the engineer to the biologist. "You want to scare them. How do you scare something that doesn't know fear?" Sue whispered. Then her eyes widened. "You introduce the concept. You don't broadcast a message. You broadcast an ecology. A top predator's ecology." The plan was born not from a military manual, but from the deep, shared memory of a species that had climbed its way to the top of a very dangerous food chain. While Hana, guarded by Ji-hun, ventured back to the crashed Odyssey to salvage the emitter, Sue worked with the ship's damaged database. She didn't pull up schematics for weapons. She accessed the xenobiology archives, the old Earth historical files, the cultural records. She found what she needed. The deep, seismic roar of a reconstructed Tyrannosaurus rex, a sound that vibrated in the bones. The chilling, efficient silence of a great white shark cutting through water, punctuated by the crash of a seal hunt. The coordinated, intelligent chatter of a wolf pack on the trail, and their triumphant howls after a kill. These were the sounds of Earth's ancient kings, but she added more. The steady, relentless beat of war drums from a dozen human cultures. The scream of a diving Stuka bomber, a sound designed to instill terror. The cold, calm voice of a sniper counting windage. And finally, the most unnatural silence of all the dead silence of space, followed by the static hiss of a targeting laser and the implied, world-ending impact of a kinetic strike dot. It was not a song of war. It was a symphony of apex predation. Back in the cave, Henna worked miracles with broken parts and desperation. She wired the emitter to a portable power cell from the ship's escape pod. "It won't reach orbit," she said, her face smudged with carbon. "But it'll blanket this whole region. It'll be like nothing their sensors have ever tasted." The Ilthan watched, trembling. To them, the low growls and roars coming from Sue's datapad were the sounds of madness, of a universe tearing itself apart. Liren chimed in despair. "You bring louder demons." "Maybe," Ji-hun said, checking the cave entrance. The buzzing of drones was getting closer. They had been traced. "Or maybe we show the bigger demon that this territory is already claimed." The first drone sliced through the silver waterfall. Its green eye scanned, locking onto the huddled group. It hummed, preparing its dissolver beam. "Now, Hana." Ji-hun yelled. Choi Hana slammed a connection home and flipped a switch. The emitter, a jury-rigged mess of crystals and wiring, glowed blue. There was no visible beam, but the air itself seemed to vibrate. The sound that erupted was not one sound, but a layered, chaotic torrent. The T-Rex's roar shook the cave, making pebbles fall. The shark's attack was a visceral crunch of water and bone. The Volf howls were lonely and cruel. Underneath it all pulsed the rhythm of the war drums, the heartbeat of a species that had turned predation into an art form. The effect on the drone was instantaneous and catastrophic. It froze in mid-air. Its green photoreceptor flickered wildly, cycling through spectra. The smooth, consuming hum of its engine broke into a stuttering, confused whine. It jerked back and forth as if slapped, the predatory audio signals overloading its simple directive processors. Find biomass. Convert biomass. This signal was not biomass. It was threat. It was dominance. It was incomprehensible. More drones entered the cave. They reacted the same way, a sudden chaotic paralysis. One crashed into the wall, its wings beating erratically. Another fired its dissolver beam wildly, vaporizing a section of rock. A swarm mind, connected across the region, experienced a ripple of dissonance. For the first time, a piece of the whole was receiving data that did not compute as food or obstacle. It computed as danger. And in a swarm, danger to a part is shared by the whole. Outside the cave, the buzzing changed. It lost its purposeful, hungry tone. It became higher, agitated. The drones stopped their methodical sweeping patterns. They began to move in erratic, nervous circles. Ji-hun watched, his sidearm half raised, forgotten. He saw not a retreat, but a confusion so deep it was a kind of pain. "It's working," he breathed. "They don't know what it is, but they know it's not prey." Sue looked at the terrified Ilthan, then at the shuddering drones. "We're not just broadcasting noise, Commander. We're broadcasting a lie. A lie that says this planet isn't a defenseless garden. It's the territory of something worse than they are." Hana adjusted the emitter's frequency, making the signal pulse and waver like a living thing. "How do you like the taste of that?" She whispered to the twitching machines. The humans stood in their cave, armed with nothing but a terrible sound and the ruthless, predatory history of their homeworld. They were not soldiers. They were biologists and engineers. And they had just declared themselves the galaxy's top predators, using the only weapon they had left, the ghost of every monster that had ever walked, swam, or flown on Earth. The hunt had taken a new turn. The pests were no longer running. They were growling back. The predator broadcast was not a weapon. It was a seed. And in the hive mind of the cracks, it took root, twisting and growing into something alien, fear. It did not kill the drones. It infected their programming. For 2 days, the strange standoff continued. The humans and the 2 Ilthans stayed in the cave, the emitter pulsing its symphony of teeth and claws, an ancient menace at regular intervals. Park Ji-hun watched through a gap in the waterfall. The Cracks drones no longer swept the area in clean, efficient lines. They moved in twitchy, hesitant patterns. Their green photoreceptors would fix on a rustling frond, fire a dissolver beam in a panic, and then jerk away as if burned. They were wasting energy. They were seeing threats in the shadows. The song of Earth was teaching them paranoia. They're learning to be afraid, Kim Sue observed, her scanner pointed outwards. But it's an unstable lesson. Their core directive to consume is fighting it. The swarm will either purge the confused units or it will adapt, Ji-hun finished. He knew they couldn't stay in the cave forever. The power cell for the emitter was draining. And the cracks were not stupid. They were a collective intelligence. It would find a way to locate the source of the noise, to rationalize it as a problem to be solved, and then solved by being eaten. They had to escalate. Choi, Hannah, agreed. She had been sketching in the soft dirt of the cave floor. The emitter keeps them confused, but it's a blanket. It's not a targeted threat. We need to make it personal. We need to show them that the predator in the song is real, and it's hunting them. Sue looked at the pale, trembling Ilfin. How? We have 2 sidearms. We have ingenuity, Hannah said, tapping her sketch. It showed a simple pit, sharpened stakes at the bottom. And we have the environment. We stop being prey that hides. We become predators that set traps. The first trap was simple. Using fallen fronds and mud, they covered a deep, water-filled hole near the cave. Beneath the surface, Hannah and Sue wedged sharpened fragments of the Odyssey's hull plating. They left a piece of the ship's discarded nutrient bar wrapper floating on top a piece of human debris. A drone, buzzing erratically, detected the foreign material. It hovered over the hole, its beam scanning the wrapper. As it dipped lower to investigate, Ji-hun, hidden in the brush, threw a heavy rock into the far side of the pool. The drone jerked towards the sound, its focus broken, and descended directly onto the sharpened spikes. It didn't explode. It was impaled, its carapace cracking. It let out a high-pitched, shrieking whine, a distress signal, and flailed helplessly. The humans did not finish it off. They let it scream. They let the distress signal bleed into the swarm's consciousness, a raw data stream of damage and helplessness that was entirely new. The second trap was fire. Sue had identified a grove of bulbous, sappy trees. The sap was highly flammable. They laid a trail of it, like a fuse, back to a sheltered position. Hannah rigged a sparker from a broken tool battery. They waited until a trio of drones, moving together for security, entered the grove. Hannah triggered the spark. The sap ignited with a soft hoop, not an explosion, but a rapidly spreading wall of low, smoky flame. Fire was unknown to the cracks. Their process was cold dissolution. This was chaotic, consuming, and bright. The drones panicked. One flew directly into the flames, its systems shorting out in a shower of sparks. The other 2 collided with each other trying to escape, fell into the burning sap, and became immobile, crackling lumps. The humans watched from a distance. They did not cheer. They studied. They noted how the drones reacted to pain and confusion. They began to hunt in earnest. They used mud and charcoal to darken their skin and clothes, breaking up their human outline. They moved not with the frantic energy of fleeing prey, but with the slow, deliberate patience of predators. They would isolate a single drone, harass it with thrown rocks or sharpened sticks from different directions, making it spin in confused circles, firing at ghosts until its energy reserves dipped. Then they would vanish. They captured a drone. It was damaged, one wing shattered. They dragged it back to the cave, ignoring its weak struggles. The Ilfin recoiled in horror, but the humans gathered around it. With clinical, brutal efficiency, they used tools to pry open its carapace. They were not trying to torture it. They were trying to understand it, to salvage its power cell for the emitter, to study its sensory organs. To the Ilfin, It was a nightmare. To any watching crack sensor, and they were sure some were, it was something else entirely. It was dissection. It was a predator not just killing, but taking apart its kill to see how it worked. It was a level of terrifying cognition far beyond mere consumption. The effect on the swarm was profound. The confused fear sparked by the broadcast was now being reinforced by tangible physical loss. Drones were not just malfunctioning. They were being systematically removed, damaged, and studied. The swarm mind began to recategorize. The signals from this area were no longer just problematic noise. They were active threat. The response protocols shifted. Small groups of drones began to cluster defensively, hovering back to back, their beams sweeping nervously. Their harvest of the nearby gray zone slowed, then stopped entirely. Resources were being diverted to deal with this new infestation. Ehun stood at the edge of the gray, ashen wasteland. 100 meters away, 5 drones hovered in a tight, nervous formation, watching him. He did not run. He stood still, meeting the gaze of their green photoreceptors. He raised his empty hands, then slowly, deliberately, bent down and picked up a fist-sized rock. He held it up for them to see. Then he turned his back on them and walked slowly, unhurriedly, back into the vibrant jungle. The message was as old as time. This is my territory. I am not afraid of you. The drones did not pursue. They remained clustered, humming an anxious, discordant tune. Back in the cave, Hana monitored the power cell. The emitter is failing. Maybe a few hours left of the broadcast. Sue looked at the data on her scanner. It doesn't matter. The seed is planted. They're not just scared of the noise anymore. They're scared of us. We've become a persistent variable their logic can't solve. We've introduced an ecology of fear. That night, under a sky streaked with the unnatural green light of the harvester ships, the buzzing from the cracks changed completely. It was a retreat. The drones in their immediate area lifted into the sky. Not in formation, but in a rushed, disorganized scramble, joining a larger stream of units flowing back towards the orbiting ships. But they were not leaving the planet. But they were pulling back from this sector, consolidating. The harvest had paused. The humans had not won a battle. They had poisoned well. They had made this corner of vernal taste wrong. They had turned a peaceful garden into a hunting ground, and they were the hunters. The galaxy's top predators had staked their claim, not with armies, but with the oldest tools they had: fire, sharp sticks, and the terrifying, intelligent will to survive. The silence that followed the drone's retreat was heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the first shocking volley. Park Ji-hun knew it wouldn't last. The cracks were a swarm. They would regroup. They would analyze. They would come back with a new solution to the human problem. And that solution would likely involve turning their entire sector of jungle into glassy. Gray ash from orbit, he stood in the mouth of the cave, looking at the darkening sky. The massive, jagged shapes of the cracks harvester ships were visible now, like sores against the stars. They're pulling back to think, he said, his voice low. But they won't give up. This planet is a meal to them. We're just a bad taste. They'll find a way to swallow it anyway. Kim Soo joined him, her scanner in hand. The Ilthans say the central hive ship is the mind. The harvesters are just mouths and hands. If the mind decides we are a threat to the whole body, it'll either run or try to crush us completely. Jian finished. He turned to the others. Hana was tinkering with the dead drone's power cell. The two Ilthan, Li Ren and Kale, watched with a mixture of awe and terror. We can't win a war of attrition here. We have one move left. We have to talk to the mind. Hana looked up, her face smudged and tired. Talk? With what? A bigger loudspeaker? No, Ji-hun said, with a lesson. A final lesson. We need to make direct contact with the hive ship. We need to show it what happens when you poke the top of the food chain and find a predator that plans. The plan was insanity. It relied on the cracks seeing them as a curiosity, a puzzle to be examined, not just target practice. Sue suggested they use the last of the predator broadcast, but modulate it, to offer a clear, simple signal leading to their location, a challenge. Adair. Hana used the last of the power cell to send a tight, repeating pulse up towards the largest harvester ship. It wasn't the full symphony. It was just the T-Rex roar, followed by a sequence of prime numbers, a signature of intelligence, not just animal noise. A beacon that said, "The predator is here. Come and see." They waited, exposed on a rocky outcrop, for an hour. Then a single, smaller vessel detached from the harvester. It wasn't a drone carrier. It was a smooth, pod-like ship. A collector. It descended silently and landed in the clearing before them. A hatch opened, revealing a dark interior. An invitation. Or a mouth. Ji-hun looked at Sue and Hana. This is it. The only chance to save Vernal, and maybe to keep Earth off their menu. He didn't wait for agreement. He walked towards the pod. After a heartbeat, the two women followed. The inside was dark and warm, the walls organic, pulsing with a faint green light. There were no restraints. The pod simply lifted off, carrying them into the belly of the beast. They felt a pressure change. Then the pod was swallowed into a vast, cavernous space within the hive ship. The air smelled of ozone and something sweetly rotten. They were deposited onto a spongy floor. Before them rose a structure that was not a machine or a throne. It was a neural node, a vast, pulsating mound of glowing green tissue veined with light. This was the closest thing to a brain the swarm had. Tendrils of light extended from it, connecting to the walls, the ship. The hive-mind. A drone, larger and more intricate than the others, hovered before the node. A beam of light shot from it, engulfing Ji-hun. He felt a pressure in his skull, not painful, but invasive. Images, concepts, the swarm's simple logic flooded him. Consume, grow, replicate. You are complex matter. You will be simplified. You are the problem. You will be solved. Ji-hun clenched his teeth. He held up his data pad, the one Sue had prepared. He didn't transmit words. He transmitted experiences. He showed it the cold, calculated formations of a Roman legion, the impersonal crush of discipline. He showed it the silent, patient crosshairs of a sniper settling over a target a mile away. He showed it the fireball of a nuclear explosion, and then the silent, drifting winter of the fallout that followed. He showed it the schematic of a kinetic bombardment rod, a simple lump of metal dropped from orbit, and the continent-shattering impact that resulted. He pushed not the emotion of fear, but the cold, hard calculus of total predation. The understanding that humans didn't just fight for food. They fought for ideas, for land, and they had invented ways to end worlds. The hive mind recoiled. The green light in the node flickered, the rhythms becoming chaotic. The drone buzzed in agitation. The concepts it was receiving were not of consumption, but of strategic annihilation. It was the difference between a locust eating a leaf and a gardener deciding to salt the entire earth, so nothing would ever grow again. Then Sue stepped forward. She transmitted pure data. The genetic diversity of Earth's apex predators. The exponential growth curve of human technology. The location of Earth, not as a target, but as a source point for this terrifying, predatory intelligence. She was drawing a map back to the predator's den. Finally, Hana stepped up. She transmitted something very simple. It was the last sound file. It was the dead silence of space, holding for a full minute. Then, a clear, calm human voice, synthesized, speaking in the Krax's own data language. It said only, "Leave, never return, or we will find your hive world. The hunt will be eternal." The silence after the voice was absolute. The pressure in the room vanished. The neural node pulsed in frantic, confused patterns. The message had been delivered. It was not a plea. It was not a declaration of war. It was an ecological warning. A top predator was marking its territory and warning a rival to back off. With the promise of total, meticulous eradication, the pod returned, its hatch opening. The humans walked back into it, their backs straight. They were not triumphant. They were emissaries who had delivered an ultimatum written in teeth and fire. The pod ejected them back onto the rocky outcrop just as dawn was breaking. They watched as, high above, the Krax harvesters began to move, but not deeper into the planet. They turned. They began to leave orbit. One by one, the great jagged ships activated their drives and shot into the deep black, moving faster than they had arrived. In their panic, some even disgorged clouds of half-processed biomass, returning it to the atmosphere in a sad, gray rain. They were not just retreating, they were fleeing. A few days later, as the humans worked with the Ilfin to build a signal fire, a new shadow fell over Vernal. It was not jagged. It was sleek, gray, and bristling with calm, purposeful power. 3 United Earth Defense frigates dropped out of warp, taking up a watchful position in high orbit. They had been on patrol, they said. A routine exercise. On the surface, the Ilfin elder, Li Ren, stood with Jian, watching the human ships. The elder's chimes were slow, filled with a new kind of awe. You saved us. But you are not like us. You are the storm that scared away the blight. How do we thank the storm? Park Ji-hun looked up at the clean lines of the human frigates, then at the vibrant, recovering jungle around them. He thought of the terrified swarm mind and the cold promise they had shown it. He put a hand on the Ilfin's slender, bark-like shoulder. You don't, he said, his voice quiet. You just remember. And you tell everyone who will listen what happens when you call for help to Earth. He smiled then, a small, hard smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tell them what answers.